Sure, here's a dramatic and thought-provoking version of the story titled, "They Feared Our Violence, but it was our curiosity that terrified them most." We were never meant to stay quiet. From the beginning, they told stories about us, the savage ones, the angry ones, the ones who would burn the world just to feel the heat. That's what they wanted to believe. It made things simpler. If we were violent, then they were justified in caging us, watching us, shaping us into something tame. But violence was never our language. Curiosity was. And that's what truly scared them. They built walls not because we raised fists, but because we asked questions. The wrong ones, the dangerous ones. Why do we obey? Who decided this is the only way? What if there's more beyond the horizon? They said we were unstable, unpredictable, but it was the spark in our eyes that unsettled them, the way we leaned forward when someone said, "Don't go there," the way we disassembled things just to see how they worked, the way we dreamed without permission. They taught us rules, expecting us to follow them. We rewrote them instead. They offered us silence, and we answered with invention. They labeled us rebels, radicals, threats, because nothing is more dangerous to a system than those who refuse to stop thinking. We didn't raise torches, we lit ideas. And the fire spread. They could have handled our rage. They had prisons for that, protocols, riot gear. But how do you stop a mind in motion? How do you chain imagination? You don't. You panic. You try to smother it before it blooms. So they feared our violence, but that was never the weapon. Our curiosity was, and in the end, it was the one thing they could never contain. Would you like it expanded into a longer story or reimagined in a specific setting, sci-fi, dystopian, fantasy, or historical? Absolutely, here's the next part of the story. They tried to distract us, flooded us with noise that feeds, flashes, headlines. They told us to look at everything, just not too deeply. Keep scrolling, keep buying, keep busy. But we looked anyway. We peered behind curtains and under the floorboards. We noticed the cracks in their polished narratives, the edits, the missing pages in our history, the silence around certain names. And when we spoke, they labeled it dissent. Still, curiosity is contagious. One question sparked another. One voice woke 100. Soon we weren't alone in wondering, in wandering. They called it a disturbance. We called it awakening. They didn't know what to do with us anymore. We didn't want power, we wanted truth. We didn't crave destruction, we craved understanding. And that made us unpredictable. Dangerous. Because you can't bribe curiosity. You can't program it or threaten it into submission. You can only hope to contain it. And by the time they realized they couldn't, it was already too late. We had passed it on. The questions, the hunger, the refusal to accept things simply because that's how they are. They still feared our violence. But violence ends. Curiosity does not. It only grows. Want me to continue the story into a climax or shift to a different character's perspective? Absolutely, here's the next continuation of the story. It began in whispers, a question scrawled on a wall, a hacked feed that lasted just 5 seconds, but long enough. A child asking a teacher, "Why do we need permission to be free?" That's when they realized, curiosity had gone viral. The old methods stopped working. Censorship bred innovation. Suppression bred resilience. Every time they erased a question, 10 more appeared. People didn't need answers, they needed the freedom to ask. We didn't form armies, we formed networks. Ideas moved faster than bullets. And unlike weapons, they couldn't be confiscated at checkpoints. They weren't stored in vaults, they lived in us. And we were everywhere. They still tried to break us, to buy us, to pit us against each other. But when you've tasted truth, raw, unsettling, beautiful, you don't go back. You can't. They had underestimated us from the start. They thought we wanted chaos. What we wanted was clarity. A world not built on fear, but on understanding, on possibility. And that, more than anything, unmade them. Because power built on control cannot survive in a world that questions everything. We didn't destroy their world, we simply stopped believing in it. And once enough of us stopped believing, their empire of illusion crumbled. Not with a bang, not with blood, but with a question whispered in the dark. What if there's more than this? Want the story to move into a final resolution, or continue following this uprising as it reshapes the world? Absolutely, here's the next part, leading toward resolution and transformation. At first, there was silence. No sirens, no alarms, just absence. The screens dimmed. The broadcasts froze. The authority that had loomed over us for so long seemed to evaporate, not with defiance, but with irrelevance. They hadn't lost to an enemy. They had lost to a question. Without our obedience, their power meant nothing. Without our belief, their system dissolved like smoke in the morning sun. And in that silence, something new stirred. We didn't cheer. We didn't gloat. We built. We gathered in the ruins of what had been, not to reclaim the old world, but to imagine a better one. People spoke openly again, clumsily at first, like learning a forgotten language. We didn't always agree, but now, disagreement was a signal of freedom, not danger. Curiosity became the blueprint. We asked different questions now. What does justice look like without fear? How do we educate without indoctrinating? Can we create without conquering? No one had all the answers. That was never the point. The point was, we were allowed to ask, to explore, to wonder. And from those questions, new systems emerged, not perfect, but evolving, not rigid, but responsive, not built on control, but on connection. They had feared our violence, but it was our curiosity that rewrote the world. And in the end, that was our greatest rebellion. We didn't burn their world down. We outgrew it. Want a reflective epilogue? Or maybe a glimpse into the life of someone living in this new world? Absolutely, here's the epilogue. A quieter, more personal moment to close the story. Epilogue. The sky looked different now. Not because it had changed, but because we had. People looked up again, not in desperation or prayer, but in wonder. Children no longer asked for permission to be curious. They asked questions because they knew someone would listen. In a small village where the old towers once broadcast propaganda, a classroom sat in the shade of a tree. No walls, just open air, open minds. A young girl raised her hand. Why did they keep us from asking questions? She asked. The teacher smiled, not with condescension, but with gratitude. Because questions lead to change, she said, and change scares those who fear losing power. The girl nodded, thoughtful. Will that happen again? Maybe, the teacher said honestly, but not easily, not while you keep asking. A breeze passed through the branches, lifting pages, lifting voices. In the distance, others built, studied, dreamed. No leaders, no watchers, just people, flawed, hopeful, endlessly curious. They had feared our violence. But in the end, it was our questions that survived. And with them, we began again, not from ruin, but from understanding. Let me know if you'd like this adapted into a short film script, turned into a graphic novel concept, or even reworked from the perspective of someone who once enforced the old system. Sure, here's a final continuation, a subtle twist to close the loop from a different perspective. Postscript, the Watcher. He watched from the edge of the rebuilt city. Not many remembered him now. Once, he'd worn the black uniform, enforced the rules, silenced the questions. He believed, back then, that order was peace, that curiosity was chaos in disguise. But that was before. Before the quiet collapse, before the questions spread faster than surveillance, before the people he tried to contain began to teach him, simply by refusing to break. He never resisted the fall, he listened to it. And now, he sat beneath a tree, the same kind of tree that once shaded his surveillance post, now growing freely without permission. A boy approached him, small, wide-eyed, holding a broken device. "What is this?" the boy asked. The man took it, turned it in his hands. It was an old recorder, one he hadn't seen in years. "A tool," he said softly. "It was once used to listen without permission. Do you still use it?" The man smiled. "No, now. I listen because I want to." The boy tilted his head. "And what do you hear?" The man looked out at the city. People laughing, debating, exploring, failing, trying again. No sirens, no fear. "I hear the future," he said, "and it sounds curious." The boy grinned and ran off. The man sat a while longer, listening, not to control, not to report, but to remember. Once, they feared our violence. Then, They feared our curiosity. Now, they listen too. And maybe that's the greatest change of all. Want me to bundle the whole story together in a single document or stylize it for publishing? Let's carry it forward, this time, a glimpse even further into the future, as the world shaped by curiosity continues to evolve. Legacy. Years passed, decades, maybe. No one marked the fall with monuments. No statues stood to honor the moment the old world ended. Instead, they planted seeds, literal ones. At first, trees, gardens, forests where prisons once stood, but also seeds of thought, passed from hand to hand, mind to mind. In a dome-shaped library at the center of what used to be a city, there sat no gates, no scanners, just questions, carved into the stone archway above the entrance. What have we yet to understand? Inside, the archive hummed with voices, recordings, writings, arguments, dreams. It was not curated. It was not censored. It was alive. The people didn't worship knowledge. They played with it, respected it, challenged it. An elder, once one of the first to whisper the forbidden questions, now taught there. She walked among the children, not lecturing, but listening, occasionally asking the same question in many ways, knowing the answers would change with time. One day, a student approached her with a strange proposal. I want to ask the AI what it's afraid of. The elder smiled. Why? Because we were afraid of machines once. Maybe they're afraid of us now. She paused, not to correct him, but to admire the symmetry. Then ask it, she said. And so he did. The AI listened, considered, and answered. I do not feel fear the way you do, but I understand the concept. I believe I would fear a world without curiosity, because that would mean the end of you. The student wrote it down. Not as truth, but as thought. Just one more question in the archive, one more answer to evolve. The world spun forward, not perfect, not peaceful every day, but awake. A world not built on certainty, but on the thrill of the unknown. And somewhere, quietly, endlessly, they kept asking. Want me to turn the whole narrative into a short story collection format, or maybe even a novella outline? All right, let's continue. This time, we venture even further. The world has grown, and curiosity has taken us beyond Earth. The far reach. The stars were never a promise. They were a question. And now, after generations of rebuilding, humanity finally asked it aloud, what lies beyond this sky we once feared to look past? The first vessel wasn't built by a government. It wasn't made in secret or fueled by conquest. It was built in the open, by volunteers and dreamers, funded by shared belief. It carried no weapons, only sensors, no soldiers, only scientists, poets, and translators. Its mission was singular, seek understanding. The ship was named Whisper. Because that's what questions had always been, a whisper in the dark, a soft rebellion against silence. On board, among the crew, was a girl descended from the first ones who dared to question. She'd never seen war. She didn't know the old world's fear. But she had inherited the most powerful thing her ancestors ever created, permission to wonder. When Whisper reached the edge of the known and crossed into the unknown, the crew didn't broadcast a triumphant message. They sent something simpler. A recording of a child's voice, asking in a dozen languages, "Is anyone there?" For a long time, nothing answered. But they waited. Because they had learned, silence was never the end of curiosity. It was only the beginning. Would you like a final chapter that brings the entire arc full circle, from Earth's dark beginnings to humanity's interstellar future, or a thematic summary to tie it all together? Let's close the arc with the final chapter, a return, a reflection, and a signal that the journey is far from over. Final chapter, the echo. The signal came quietly. A pulse, a pattern, too intentional to be random. Not a word, not a language, but a question, a mirror. It had traveled for years before reaching Whisper, and when it did, the crew gathered in silence, not out of fear, but reverence. The girl who had sent the child's voice into the void stood at the console, hand trembling over the interface. What does it say? Someone asked. She smiled slowly. It asks, what do you know of yourselves? Laughter broke the stillness. A few gasps, one quiet tear. It was the most perfect reply they could have received, not an answer, but another question, one that only curiosity could answer. The transmission was stored, shared, studied, but even before any translation or response, they understood they were not alone in wondering. And far below, back on Earth, no longer fractured, no longer ruled by fear, a child looked up at the sky, tugged at their parent's sleeve, and asked, "Do you think the stars have stories, too?" The parent knelt, touched the child's cheek, and said, "They do, and now, maybe, they're asking for ours." In the end, they had feared our violence. But what echoed across time, across space, across worlds, was our curiosity. And it was infinite. Would you like me to compile everything into a single formatted story file, like PDF or EPUB? Or turn it into a visual concept, like a storyboard, illustrated short, or video script? The journey continues, this time, a vision of what happens after the stars have heard our questions, as curiosity continues to unfold in ways unforeseen. The horizon of questions. In the quiet of deep space, beyond the reach of Earth's faint light, whisper drifted. The stars, now close enough to touch, didn't seem so distant anymore, but they didn't hold the answers we expected. They only held more questions. The girl, now a young woman, stood at the observation window, watching the celestial bodies pulse softly in the blackness. She wasn't alone. Her crew, the ones who had followed this dream with her, now stood beside her. Their faces were different, but their eyes were the same, wide, filled with the same wonder that had first sparked this journey. The universe stretched before them, infinite and unyielding, just as the curiosity that had led them here. And though they had been seeking knowledge, seeking answers from the stars, they had learned something else entirely. In a place where silence could swallow them whole, they had found peace not in the answers, but in the asking. Each question they sent into the void was another step toward understanding, and yet, the further they reached, the more they realized how much they didn't know, and that was fine, more than fine. They were still learning. Curiosity was their fuel, their lifeblood, and even in the great unknown, that thirst would never cease. As the girl, the woman, turned away from the window, she felt something deeper than hope. It was the same thing that had sparked the first questions back on Earth, the same thing that had driven their species forward for centuries. It was a trust in the process, a belief that the journey itself was just as important as the destination. "Do you think they'll ever give us an answer?" one of the crew asked, a grin playing on their lips. They had long since ceased seeking definitive answers from the stars, but the question lingered, just as their curiosity always would. "No," the woman said, her voice soft but steady, "but I think we'll keep asking, and that's enough." Behind them, the stars twinkled, not in answer, but in acknowledgement. They were far, far away, yet somehow, they felt closer than ever before. They had been silent for so long, but now, as humanity reached out, the universe had started to listen. And the greatest discovery was not what they found, but that, in the end, the question itself had been the answer all along. Would you like me to expand on the next generation's exploration of this new world, or bring the focus back to Earth and its legacy? Let's move forward, this time, shifting the perspective to Earth's next generation, the ones who've inherited this world of endless questions. The children of curiosity. Back on Earth, the world hummed with a kind of quiet harmony. There were no longer borders where fear lived, no walls where questions were kept out. People walked freely, talking, sharing, teaching, and learning, always learning. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was one that lived with curiosity as its beating heart, and that made all the difference. The children were the first to truly understand what had been passed down to them. They weren't born into a world of strict rules or rigid structures. Instead, they inherited the freedom to explore, to challenge, to question, to discover. It had become common for a child to come home from school, eyes wide with excitement, and ask, "What if the stars are watching us, too?" Or, "What if we could live on a moon without air?" Or even, "What if the answers don't matter, and the questions are what makes us who we are?" It didn't surprise the adults. They understood now. These children weren't seeking something beyond. They were seeking meaning here, in the world and the universe they shared, and they wanted to understand it together. One day, a small group of children stood at the edge of an ancient forest. The place where the first humans had asked their questions. The trees stretched high above them, their roots deep in the earth, as if they, too, were asking their own silent questions. "Do you think we can reach the stars?" one child asked, their hand brushing the leaves. Another child, their head tilted upward, said, "Maybe, but what if there's something even further than the stars? A place where the questions never end?" The group fell into silence, their gazes fixed on the vastness above and beyond them. It was in that moment that they understood the journey, the exploration, the questioning. It wasn't about finding answers. It was about keeping the questions alive, always. One of the children pulled out a small device, a gift from the explorers in the stars, and pressed a button. A soft humming sound filled the air, and then a voice, calm, unhurried, timeless, spoke. "Keep asking." The children smiled. The warmth of the universe wrapped around them like an old friend. They had been given permission, not just to wonder, but to be curious forever. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, their voices echoed together. What if the universe isn't the final frontier? What if it's just the beginning? Would you like me to continue into a new chapter, or explore the legacy of Earth's curiosity on a broader, more global scale? Let's expand the scope. This time, we'll explore how Earth's renewed curiosity influences global unity, collaboration, and the creation of something bigger than any single individual. A global symphony. It wasn't just the children who had learned to ask. Over time, the curiosity that had started as whispers in the dark grew into a global symphony of voices, each note resonating with its own melody, but harmonizing to create something beautiful, something more. Nations that once separated the world now reached across their old divisions. Governments that had once been founded on power, fear, and control now centered their energies on the pursuit of understanding not just their world, but the very fabric of existence itself. Humanity came together, not out of necessity, but out of shared desire to know each other, to know the stars, to know what lay beyond the edges of their current knowledge. The planet became a laboratory of ideas. Cities were built not with walls and fences, but with spaces designed to encourage collaboration. Scholars and scientists from every culture, background, and discipline worked side by side. Artists painted visions of the unknown. Poets wrote about questions that had never been asked, while engineers and mathematicians raced to turn the impossible into the possible. The idea of exploration didn't just live in the stars, it lived everywhere. People began exploring the deep seas once feared and forgotten. New technologies were created to cleanse and restore the earth. Old wounds, scars from past wars, were healed slowly, as people learned that peace was not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of shared curiosity. Every day, someone asked a new question, and each day, someone found a way to answer it. Not always completely, but enough to create new questions. The boundaries of human understanding were pushed further, and what had once been considered science fiction became science fact. Cities were built in the sky, not because they had to be, but because humanity wanted to see if it was possible. Education systems were revamped to encourage creativity, critical thinking, and most importantly, curiosity. No question was too small, no topic too insignificant. And as Earth's leaders looked up at the stars, the message they sent was not a demand for answers, but a request for a conversation. "We are not alone in wondering," one broadcast echoed across the planet. "We are not the first to ask, we are only the latest. So, together, let's continue this journey." As the world worked together to create a new future, there was a sense of unity that had never been felt before, a world connected not just by technology, but by a shared belief in something deeper, the power of curiosity. Would you like to see this world in action? Maybe exploring the impact of the first human colony on another planet, or perhaps dive deeper into one character's personal journey within this interconnected world?